Okay, so I guess we're ready to begin. So good evening. This is a session on Kashrus and Yonah Pesach. The session tonight is being sponsored in the Schus Nishmas Rav Yitzchok ben Rav Eliezer Tzvi Zev Al Bashalom and Lila Nishmas Chaim Shimon Chanan Yeshua Levi ben Mordechai Yankiv Sheyichiv. Shoma should have an aliyah. We have 1 hour to cover a tremendous, vast amount of material. So basically, when it comes to kashrus, we're speaking about kashering the kitchen. We're talking about the vessels, the kelim, and we're talking about the actual food. And then there are items that come in contact with the food, the different utensils, and things of that sort. So I think I'll try to split things basically in half, spend approximately half of the time speaking about kashering the kitchen and the other half of the time on various products. Now, I'd like to give a few words of introduction. First of all, about Pesach in general, that is a din Shulchan Aruch. A person shouldn't say that this Pesach, this Yom Tov, is so difficult. And it says that it's because of all the chumras, maybe that they're not that it was a limud zchus, that they're not doing a prohibition. But when one keeps in mind, first of all, that the point of Pesach is a time for its meidim l'simcha. Yes, there's no denying that there's a lot of work involved, but the tremendous responsibility of the Jewish woman and Jewish men, for that matter, of making sure that a person is prevented from consuming even a small amount, even a mashahu of chametz, and how it has such an intense effect on the entire year, is enough that itself should overpower any of the difficulties. And the difficulties are be'emes part of the schus, famous word from Rabbi Yitzchak Berditchev, that the tashrak, at the time of Tkiya Shefer, that the schus of the Am Yisrael is all of the hard work they put into cleaning and preparing for Pesach. It's a famous story today. Is Beis Nissen. It's the Hilul of the Rebbe Rashab. Also like to mention, it was my father's 20th yahrzeit today also. But the Rebbe Rashab in Tomchet Mimim, there was a certain Bachar in Yeshiva, the story is told, that was very, very coarse in his midas and his character. The Rebbe Rashab instructed the Frierdiker Rebbe to give him the job of cleaning the oven in Lubavitch, and it was a tremendously time-consuming, difficult job, and he worked very, very hard at it for weeks and weeks and weeks. And afterwards, the Rebbe Rashab said, "Look at him; he's changed in his essence, a totally different person." And this Bacher went on to become one of the biggest Rabbanim in Lubavitch. And the idea itself that one exerts himself for a mitzvah is itself a reward, but the idea that everybody's having this tremendous chus of being prevented from consuming even the slightest amount of chametz itself is a motivating force. So we're going to speak first about kashering the kitchen, and we're speaking about vessels, hagolos kelim. So there are two halachic issues that have to be recognized. I'm going to first give a few halachic principles, which will make it easier to understand, and we're going to walk through the kitchen one piece at a time. There are two issues to be dealt with when you're kashering kelim. The first one is one has to make sure that it's absolutely clean. And although one always has to do that whenever kashering any vessel, when it comes Pesach, it's even more important, because if a person missed a speck of something, even if it was a pot that was used once for pork, but if chas v'sholom a person missed it, so then if it's less than 1/60th, then it's nullified. But if that chametz is still existing in the keli, it's one of the stringencies of chametz on Pesach that there's no such thing as bittul on Pesach. So if some of that food is left there, it'll make the entire food chametzdik. And there are many, many stringencies we have, even when it comes to the second issue. So the first issue is making sure that everything is clean. which is, of course, I keep things clean. Yeah, but when you're kashering a pot and it's been used for a long period of time, when you look at the various points where there's screws or handles which are meeting the body of the vessel itself, which are very, very difficult to clean, if not impossible to clean. When you're talking about an oven, which to make it spotlessly clean is extremely, extremely tedious, difficult task. But that's the first challenge. Then after you have passed that and you've gotten rid of any trace of any food, then one has to take care of the taste that's absorbed in the walls of the keli. Now, that we derive from the Chumash. The Gemara says that the story in Midian, in Parshas Mates, when they were given the commandment of kashering the vessels that they captured from the Midianites, that everything was used in fire, you kasher with fire, and everything was used with water, you kasher with hot water. So the Gemara explains that the reason for that is tam ke'ikr, that the taste, which is absorbed in the wall of the vessel, has the same status as the food itself. And if later on, first, if it absorbed the taste, and then later on you're going to cook your pesach of food in it, and the taste comes out from the wall into the food, so then you have a problem of chametz. Now, although we have many leniencies, even when it comes to that, there's a difference between whether it's been used in the last 24 hours or not. It's the difference in many cases, whether it's gone through into one thing and then went to another thing, not barnat, which was actually discussed in the Power Hour series a bit. But many of these leniencies do not apply when it comes to chametz on Pesach, certainly lechatchila, that even something which is Eina ben Yemei, who hasn't been used for 24 hours, we have more of a problem with it when it comes to chametz on Pesach, and so to many other stringencies, as we know that it's prohibited to have benefit from it, it's prohibited to own, and so on and so forth. So we have to get the taste out of the walls of the keli, otherwise it's going into the food. Now, this is applying primarily to vessels that are coming directly in contact with the food. We have other sorts of things in the kitchen that primarily come in contact with other utensils. So let's say you have a countertop or a table. So although it does happen, one might take some toast out of the toaster and put it straight on the counter or on the table. But it's more often used that you have a plate or a bowl or even a pot, which is a vessel coming in contact with a vessel. So I'm going to give you one more principle, which is important to understand because it makes things a lot easier. And although people see it often and use it often in the kitchen, they don't always understand fully the idea behind it. And therefore, some things which are unnecessary they do, and some things which are more necessary they ignore. And that is the use of tinfoil or other sorts of barriers in order to protect against things becoming chametz. We have a principle called shtei kaderis, two pots. When we have two vessels, even if you would have one, theoretically speaking now, obviously this is not going to happen in your house. You're not allowing a pot of spaghetti in your house. But if you would have a hot pot of spaghetti and a hot pot of pesach soup, and the two pots touch each other when they were hot, if the point of contact is dry and clean, b'diavad, everything remains kosher. Now, obviously, we don't do this on purpose. This is only something which is after the fact. But when it comes difficult to kasher a certain area, so then if you put some foil in front of it, so it makes things a lot easier. It doesn't have to be foil. It could be any surface, any material that's going to prevent the food on the one side that might still be there from coming in contact directly with another vessel. So if the point of contact of the two remains clean and dry, so then there's no problem. Technically speaking, then, if one would have a chametz sticker counter, let's say, or a chametz sticker table, and it's difficult to kosherize, so technically speaking, if one would be able to cover it in such a strong way that it's not possible for any steam to come in between, and there's no possibility of it ever having a breakage in it or anything that would allow moisture or food to come through. So that would certainly, at least b'diavad, prevent anything from becoming chametz. So we don't normally rely on this lechatchila, but sometimes there are difficult to reach places, and we'll discuss that as we go through the kitchen. So I have a PowerPoint here, so I hope they'll allow me to share the screen. If you just give me one moment. Yes. So let's talk first about stovetops. The tech person or somebody could just let me know if there's a problem. So here, different style of stovetops. On the left, you have a gas stovetop. In the middle, you have an electric. And on the right, you have a glass top. The issue is, you're not normally putting food directly on any of these stovetops. You're putting a pot or some sort of cooking utensil on top. So you have a keli, which is touching a keli. Is that the problem? So if it would be clean and dry, so even if it was a chametz stick stovetop, so then if the point of contact was clean and dry, then b'diavad we wouldn't worry about it. As the Alter Rebbe brings in Shulchan Aruch, we're concerned that chametz fell on it during the year, and then we have to kasher it. And the Alter Rebbe, it's actually the day of the Beis Nissen. There's a pirush from the Rebbe Rashabi, made a kitzer of the laws of Agalus Kelim, many things in Hilchos Pesach from the Alter Rebbe. And there's some argument what the Alter Rebbe exactly meant, whether he means libun gomer, whether you really have to do a proper, to turn it red hot completely, and the Rebbe Rashab explains that you do. So that means the point of contact between the pot and the stovetop would have to become red hot. So that's going to differ about the possibility of doing this according to the three types of desktops. So here we have a gas range. So you see here's a pot sitting on the fire. The only part that's really touching the pot is this, the whatever you call them, the pieces of metal that are sticking up directly on top. The burner itself underneath, and even the frame that's holding up these supports is not coming in contact with the pot. So the only thing one would really need to turn red hot, that's called libun kal in halacha. If something is over 950 or 900 degrees Fahrenheit, different measurements of what that would mean, but physically, if it turns red hot, so that point of contact would be sufficient to kasher it. The rest of it would need to be libun kal, which is a much lower temperature, and we'll speak about that more when we come to the oven itself. In general, when it comes to kashering utensils, it should be done by someone that knows the laws of kashering, or at least someone that was showed how to do their particular items that they're kashering in their kitchen. But because of the difficulty of doing it, that's why, although there are certain spiritual benefits that are brought down in Sfarim about taking specifically a chametz stick kitchen and turning it into a Pesach kitchen, because you're transforming, so to speak, the chametz into matzah. But in practical terms, if one is able to afford Pesach kelim, so the kashrus benefits of that, I think certainly outweigh, certainly halachically speaking, the spiritual benefits. So how exactly to do this? You would normally turn the grates upside down and put them directly in the fire. You can kasher it right there. You don't need a torch. It's usually when you have to turn something red hot, it's better to do it at night, and then you can turn off the light, and it just has to be a dull red. It doesn't have to look like this. Now, electric stove tops are much easier. You turn them up to maximum, and as soon as they turn red hot, so they're kosherized. Now, you have to leave it on for a longer period of time because this rim, everything has to be properly cleaned before. You have to lift that up and clean underneath, clean under that bowl, and so on. And then you have to leave it on for your average cooking time in order to, at least till it reaches a libun kal. And how long you have to do that will depend on the individual unit, but it should become hot enough that if you touch a piece of tissue paper on it, it would change color, it would turn brown or something of the sort. Now, these glass tops are deceptive. So when you turn it on to the maximum, here's one with an electric coil underneath and say, hey, I turned everything red hot, but you didn't turn anything red hot over here except the coil underneath. This glass top, if it would turn the same temperature as that coil, would shatter. It's not built to withstand such a temperature. So aside from the fact, there are a number of issues. The short conclusion is that one is not allowed to kasher these for Pesach. Reasons, first of all, even if it would be glass, we don't kasher glass for Pesach. That's minhag Ashkenaz. We brought down Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch as well. In addition, these are usually compounds, In fact, nobody really knows what they are because they're proprietary secrets, and one company doesn't want to tell another company what's exactly being used. And the third reason is anything you're afraid you're going to break, you can't kasher because you're afraid you're not going to kasher it properly. So these cannot be used, these stovetops cannot be used for Pesach. Now, as far as an oven, so if you have a self-cleaning oven, so a properly true self-cleaning oven that's working in good condition, which will get over 900 degrees Fahrenheit or more than that, will be considered by halacha, according to most poskim, to be liban gomer. But there are a number of reasons, a number of other issues that arise. So here you have a picture of an oven door. So you see here in the cooking cavity, you have a seal around it because such intense heat would be dangerous for the people in the room. And then you see, it's a little difficult to see here, but on the door that's open here, you see that an elevated area, and that fits inside, fills up this cavity. But the area on the outside, this flat area over here is not being affected by the self-cleaning that's going on inside. In addition, there are those that make an issue that sometimes there's glass on the door, and we have the same issue of kasher and glass. But in any case, this area on the outside, so you might say, well, since it's outside, it's not affecting the food inside the oven. So that's true. But on the other hand, when you made your Lakshan Kugel or whatever chametz stick of food you did during the year, and some of it might have spilled on here, you might have put it down, or you take a look and see if it ever gets dirty. So if you have chametz over there, so then what's going to happen? You're going to take your pesach of food out, and it's going to touch that area. So that's why these areas have to be covered. Many times you have in the door vents, and it's not clear exactly what fell down there. So basically, those the kasher self-cleaning ovens, those that allow it, they're assuming that it's being used at the same temperature as higher, and the air that's circulating through is the temperature of the self-cleaning segment, and that's going to take care of it. If you don't have a self-cleaning oven, they're extremely difficult to kosherize, and you can take one of the madrichim. So you have this is centered in Crown Heights, so the Bezdin in Crown Heights, Rabbi Braun has an excellent madrich about kashering things, but it's extremely difficult to kasher a regular standard oven, and it's beyond the scope of this particular class to go into it. Sinks. So just to understand what's happening in a sink, an average sink has a hot water heater somewhere. So here's some large hot water heaters, which are, let's say, in a basement or something of the sort, and it's flowing out through these pipes and coming out the faucet, which in halachic terms, the source of the hot water is a klirishin. That's a primary source of heat, and the water that's coming out is a iri klirishin, which means the water that's coming out of the sink has the ability to cause taste to be transferred from one dish to another, or food, when you're washing food off the dishes, and hot water is making it go in. Here's another case where there's a smaller hot water heater, which is under the sink. You also have those that work with plates and don't keep a tank. And that's really an issue to use on Yom Tov altogether. That's a separate issue. They have other types of hot water systems today, and which create other issues, but we're not here to talk about that. We're talking about the hot water that's coming out of the sink. I do want to mention that there's another issue which I don't have a solution for, and I'm not sure what the other Rabbanim hold, but I know Rabbi Handel Shalom, who I learned from, Paskin like this Minchas Yitzchak, who held that if you are in a building where this hot water is being used in one system for people that are not keeping Pesach, so if there's ever hot water that's at the same time being connected with somebody that, for example, is using hot water to rinse out their hot spaghetti because they're not Jewish or they're not keeping Pesach, since chametz on Pesach is also b'masha who can make all the hot water in the boiler chametzdik. So you should speak with your local Rav if you have such a situation, whether this is something you have to be concerned about, and if you do, what are the solutions for it? But again, it's beyond the scope of what we're talking about. So the question we're dealing with now is how to deal with this sink, which when you're washing chametz to dishes during the year, so it absorb the taste of chametz. So this is a klirishin, it's coming out, and let's say you have a stainless steel. So if it's a stainless steel sink, at least you have a material that it's possible to kasher. So the way to do that would technically, since the principle is kabbalah kachpalte, the way it absorbed the taste is the way you kosherize it. So if it came out being poured from a klirishin, from the source of hot water, so then you should be able to boil up a pot of water and then pour it all over the sink. There are two issues with that. One is that sometimes people take hot pots, which they themselves are a klirishin, and place it down directly in the sink when the oven is still yad saledisbei, when it's still hot. And the other issue is that if you have hot food, like that hot solid food that fell in, the law of a davar gush is that it also has the status of a klirishin, and that's why um, this same principle applies to tables and countertops, whereas if it would be only a question of liquid spilling on it, it would be sufficient to pour boiling water over it. But because of these two issues, that's not sufficient. Now, what you'd want to do is take and put in a pot of boiling water. So obviously, you're not doing that, not with your sink, nor with your counters, nor with your table. So what we do is we bring the boiling water to the surface itself. And the way you do that is for a counter, it's more doable that one takes a rock. And again, you shouldn't do this unless you've seen it done before and instruct them the safe way to do it. But you heat up the rock till it becomes very hot to the point that it's capable of boiling water. And then the hot water that's poured out of that percolator or that klirishin, that whatever pot you use to boil up the water, when you put the stone close to the surface that you're kashering, so what's going to happen, you pour the water over that, it boils the water. So you don't put the stone necessarily sitting on the surface, very close to the surface, so the hot water will boil very close to it, and it's going to cool off the rock. You're going to have to heat it up again and go through like that. If you have a flat surface, like a countertop, so then you can use an iron, and the iron, you pour boiling water over it, and then the iron, you'll feel that it boils and it bubbles up again. You would not recommend you do this unless you are confident you've seen somebody do it before and you are confident that you can do the same thing. I mentioned before Libun Gomer. Libun Gomer is when you turn something red hot with fire. Libun Kal is a lower level of temperature, and that is very doable for a stainless steel sink, or if you have stainless steel counters or anything like that. Then we actually have two different levels between Libun Kal, that if it's something that we have a crevice where it's a possibility that there's a little remnant of food there, as we have around the seal, when you have the drain of the sink around here, so that is actually very tricky. One has to be very careful when doing this because there's a rubber gasket underneath, and if you don't know how to handle the torch properly, you could end up burning that. And if you see simres oshon, not from the seder, but from your sink, it's probably the gasket burning, and you might end up having a dripping under your sink. So if somebody's using a torch, they should really know what they're doing. But if you do that with a libun kal and does not have to be that hot, again, if there's a possibility of some sort of remnant of leftover, then you use a tissue to see whether it reached the proper temperature. If it's a flat surface without any crevices, so then it just has to turn yad saledis by, and skilled people can see from the little change in color in the stainless steel when it's reached a sufficient temperature. Now, speaking of countertops, you have a backsplash, for example. So very frequently, pots will be on the counter, and if they're being pushed into the back, so then that's something also that perhaps chametz spilled there, or if the pot was dirty and hot when it touched it. So that's a good place where if you put anything to cover it, whether it's tin foil or corrugated plastic or anything, just to be a barrier, even though you cleaned it, but if there was hot food being used in that area, hot chametz, so then this will provide a barrier, as we brought the example of the two pots, the law of shtei kederes. And now there are all different sorts of surfaces. So officially stone is allowed to be kashered, so that granite is allowed to be kashered. Now, granite, you have pure granite and you have composite granite, which has a significant amount of resin. And there's some discussion among the authorities whether that can also be kashered like stone. Seems to be the majority opinion holds that you can. There are those that say you can't. Quartz, and someone wrote in a question about Caesar stone, which I believe is similar to quartz. Quartz is much more controversial whether that's able to be kashered. And there are others that have different stoneware that has nothing to do with stone. It's made out of ceramic, and ceramic cannot be kashered, not for Pesach and not for the rest of the year either. To go around the rest of the kitchen just quickly, so pots and pans and cutlery. So if you have things which are composite, that you say, for example, you have a knife and it has a handle made out of one material and then the blade made out of metal. So in general, we don't kasher those for Pesach because to see, make sure that there was not a mashru chametz, even the tiny bit of chametz in between at the place where they meet, is virtually impossible. And so too, anytime you're going to have pots, covers, anytime you have something, one thing attached to another, whether it's screwed on and so on and so forth, one has to be very, very careful to make sure that they're absolutely clean. And really, it should be someone that knows the laws of kashering in order to do that. Here in Montreal, the Vada has a tent they put up every year before Pesach, and the Rabbanim sit there, and the main job, sometimes it's halachas, can you kasher this and how do you kasher it? But most often it's making an inspection and sending people back to the cleaning table because we found a place where there's some remnant of food and the people cleaned it very carefully but overlooked something and it needs to be re-cleaned. So that's definitely advantageous if one can afford it to have separate utensils as much as possible for Pesach. Things that are used for coal, like a fridge. So halachically speaking, as long as there's no mamashis, there's no actual food there, there's no problem. But the custom is to put some sort of covering so things are not put directly on the shelf. Now, let me just explain. When you have, practically speaking, to cover a table, a dining room table, a dinette table, a counter, frequently people ask, do I have to kasher it and cover it, or is one of the two enough? So when you have formica is a question whether it's, in many materials, it's questionable whether you can kasher them in the first place. So wood, for example, it's clear, according to halacha, you can kasher it with boiling water, but in a certain sense, it's only theoretical because the wood has to be absolutely smooth. There cannot be any crevices. So most times people are using some wood, a cutting block or something of the sort. There's going to be some knife marks in it, and you're going to have to really sand it down completely, which is a tremendous job in order to make sure that it's absolutely smooth and absolutely flat. When you have formica counters, so then, aside from the fact that you have many also joints, you have sometimes trim, and where one piece meets another piece, is it really possible to clean over there properly? And then there's the question: is formica and plastic in general is a whole discussion in the poskim, a whole major disagreement whether it's something that could be kashered or not. And usually we're more strict when it comes to Pesach not to kasher it. So therefore, you're going to cover it. Now, what do you have to cover it with? So we learned the law of the two pots, the law of shtei kedetus. As long as there's a dry and clean interface between the two, then it should be sufficient. However, anybody that's covered a kitchen counter, a well-used kitchen counter, sees when it comes after Pesach, it's not necessarily dry underneath. Even if one used plastic and all sorts of things, somehow water finds its way through. In addition, there's another issue, and that is the taste is really only going to be transferred if it's hot. So if one puts something which is thicker, even though it might not be waterproof, but if it's something which has, let's say, a thick piece of cardboard, and that's covered with a plastic, so then the heat won't go through, piece of plastic or some cardboard or something of that nature, something which is thicker, so then you're protected from all directions, even if, according to the opinions, for example, that the formica cannot be kashered. Let's say it's a dining room table where you can't kasher it at all. because it's a fancy table. You're not going to ruin the entire table. So if you have it covered with something which has some thickness to it, that the table would never get hot, and then you have another cover on top of that to keep it dry, plastic or something of that sort. So then that's that would be sufficient, and we would use that if you have a material like a dining room table that you can't kasher at all. So then you just cover it, but you cover it well, and you take care of both eventualities, both as far as the heat is concerned and as far as keeping it waterproof to make sure nothing penetrates. And that's why foil is not appropriate to be used. It's not very useful. I mean, you can do it if you want, but it doesn't really help very much if you're talking about a counter or a countertop or a table or something of that sort. If you're talking about a wall, or let's say even you have cabinets over your stovetop, and take a look next time you cook up a pot of spaghetti and see when the steam goes up there, does that become hot? If it does, if it's close enough for fire safety, they usually keep it some distance away from the stovetop. But if you have chametz steam coming out of your pots, and when it hits that cabinet, it's still hot. So then that's something you can't kasher a cabinet, right? But it is appropriate around the stove area where you're cooking to cover those areas with foil if there's any possibility there would be steam or anything similar to that in that area. Let me just see if there are any other questions that came in about kashering. Can I use a chametz pot to kasher sinks? So when you use the pot, whatever you're kashering, you are allowed to use a chametz pot. You have to make sure it hasn't been used for 24 hours. You have to make sure it's absolutely clean. And you can use a chametz pot to kasher utensils. You don't have to kasher it first, although many do. But afterwards, the minig is certainly to kasher it if you want to use that pot. On Pesach, on oven door, I spoke about. Can I use pots on Pesach that may have been used by my Sephardic cousin to cook rice last Pesach? So using kitnias that was used by somebody, but him as a heter, as a machlekes poskim, it's better to kasher it. Is using a heated stone an absolute must. The Alter Rebbe does bring it down in Shulchan Aruch, and it would seem that according to the Alter Rebbe and Tzemach Tzedek, who are strict about a dover gush, meaning a solid piece, so if somebody would have a hot piece of pizza, hot bagel, or anything of that sort that was on the tables, then it would be necessary to use the heated stone. I assume that's meant by the question of heated stone. Okay, so now let's get on to the issue of food. A moment. Okay, so food products. So let me take this off for a moment. So I'll go through the list I was given of various products, but first I will give some general principles, just as I did about kashering, kashering the kitchen. Um, as I mentioned earlier, we have certain stringencies that we have by chametz on Pesach that we don't have in other areas of halacha. So, for example, when you have something which is nullified in 1/60th, bittul b'shishim. So you had a drop of milk fell by mistake into a pot of meat. So then we say it's nullified in 1/60th. Fine. And it stays that way forever. Question is, if you had some chametz that fell into a pot before Pesach, so then it was also batal b'shishim. We don't have the prohibition of mashahu that 60 times is not sufficient until Pesach comes. It was before Pesach, so then it was already nullified. The question is, does it wake up? So in the halachic terms, that's called chezer v'nir, that it wakes up again in the middle of Pesach. So do we have to worry about this? So there is an opinion, the opinion of the Rambam. The Alter Rebbe quotes it and says we don't paskin like that. If you want to be machmer for yourself, you can, but you shouldn't be machmer for other people. That you always have to worry about chezer v'nir. So that's not a halacha consideration. However, with things which are dry, yavish beyavish, when you have pieces of things, so there might be a piece of something. So then we say, even though it might have been nullified before Pesach, when it comes Pesach time, it's chayzer v'nir, it wakes up again. And then the whole mixture can't be consumed because we have a small amount of chametz in it. Then we have sort of an intermediate category between liquid and solid, and that's powders, things like flour. So things that are in such a state, on the one hand, they're dry, but on the other hand, you can't really separate one from another. They're so mixed up. It's a liquid is really mixed up. You can't separate them in any way unless you do some sort of distilling or some sort of chemical process, laboratory process. But solid pieces, you can sit there and separate them. If it's pieces of wheat, so then you can separate the chametz ones from the not chametz ones. But it ends up being flours, and again, it's basically an impossibility. So that's a whole machlekes aposkim. Do we have to worry about that or not? So I'm not here to make you all into Torah scholars when it comes to the laws of chayzer v'nir, but it's very relevant to understand this. And people, the very common question people ask is, what's with manufactured foods, and what's with peeling, and what's if I do it before Pesach? And if I did everything before Pesach, can I do everything before Pesach? And if you understand some of the halachas behind it, you can understand perhaps why it's so difficult to answer this question. So I'm going to answer the question as best as I can, but we have a number of opinions whether you have to worry in the middle of Pesach, just like even if you did something from before Pesach. So it depends what it is you were doing. If what you were doing was a liquid, so then halachically speaking, there are those that are machmer, but we don't have to worry about that. If it was a liquid, if it was a solid, it's a different story. So the question is, when you're doing a certain chumrah, whether it's peeling or not using manufactured foods, why are you doing it? What exactly are you worried about? So what the person themselves is doing, what they're worried about, they might not know what they're really worried about. But the question, what are they really worried about? What's the reality? What's happening over there in the food? So, okay, it'll make you from a mazid into a shegi. You did it by accident because you didn't know. But feel free to go off the show, because after I tell you, then you won't be able to say you don't know. In any case, another issue I'd like to bring up is that of kitnias. So kitnias are things like rice and beans, which by Minig Yisrael Teirahu, universally among Ashkenazim and also among many groups of Sfardim, do not consume kitnias on Pesach, but the law is much different. It's not chametz. There's an opinion in the Gemara that you can make your chayiv kares for eating rice and you can make matzah out of it, but we don't paskin like that. So, so you don't need to sell kitnias. You don't need to sell your rice before Pesach. And in addition, you're allowed to have benefit from it on Pesach. The Alter Rebbe says people that would use shemen kitnias, oil from kitnias, soy oil or something like that, to light Yom Tov candles, are allowed to do it on Pesach, and we're not worried it's going to drip into the food. And the reason is because even if it would drip into the food, it's nullified even in the middle of Pesach. Not only b'shishim, even b'reiv. If it's less than 50%, it's already bottled. It's already nullified. So kitnias is a much more minor prohibition, but it's a prohibition nevertheless. And it also prohibits, as was indicated from what we said before, the utensils it was cooked in. So therefore, if you have a person, or let's say you have a baby that needs to have formula made out of kitnias, that's what the baby needs, that's what the baby's going to eat. You just have to make sure it's kosher Pesach. Sometimes the soy-based formula will actually be real chametz. With the modern day food processing, especially with the use of enzymes, many things that were never a problem became problems as a result of the nature of food processing and become absolute chametz as a result of the way they make it. In any case, those utensils should be washed. If you have somebody that's sick and has to eat kitnias, so that should not be washed in the place of the sink. It should be washed in the bathroom or something, some other place like that. So let me go through some of the products over here. So it's a question, what does it need to be kosher Pesach? What's acceptable? What's not acceptable? What's more muhudir? So the problem with hidurim, I can tell you what it says in Shulchan Aruch, but sometimes people ask, do I have to keep this hidur? Do I have to keep this hidur? And it's very difficult to say how much a person should be mahadir. You can say whether it's not kosher Pesach, it's yeah kosher Pesach, But if it's a hiddur, how far do you have to worry about something? You have, even among kashrus agencies, some of the kashrus agencies are concerned about certain things, and other kashrus agencies are not. And you look at the different guides that are coming out. Every kashrus agency gives a guide for Pesach, and you'll see that one of them will say that this is no problem, and the other one say it's yeah problem. One says it yeah needs hashkacha, the one says it doesn't need hashkacha. It's just that it's a little sad, but I guess it's humorous. So you have the Diet Coke. I don't know if it's still like that. So I don't know, but there's one kashrus agency that gives a Diet Coke in Canada, and says kosher Pesach, and the other kashrus agency that says the Diet Coke made in Canada is kosher Pesach for kidneys, for people that eat kidneys. Okay, so the people that live in the second place, they go to buy Diet Coke from the second place because they don't eat kidneys, so they want to have it that it says on the label that it's kosher Pesach. They don't want to have it only for oichla kidneys because they don't eat kidneys. The only problem is it's exactly the same Diet Coke in the bottle. It's just one kashrus agency is passing that the aspartame has the classification of kidneys, and the other one is going according to the um, halachic category, which is modern formulation, so to speak, of kidneys and ishtana, that once the kidneys goes through some degree of change, they're no longer has the status of kidneys, and others do not accept that. So the one that holds that it's kidneys and ishtana says it's kosher Pesach, and the other one says no, it's still kidneys, and it can't make a kosher Pesach. So you will have differences even among kashrus agencies. I'll point out some of them as we go along. Okay, what's with raw meat and chicken and fish? So technically speaking, if nothing happened to them, it's not a problem, but there are certain potential problems. One should certainly rinse everything well um, before using it. I know there are places that are using packaging material, and you can have it under a hashkacha that's kosher Pesach. And there are kashrus agencies that hold that even if there's kidneys in the packing material itself, that's not a halachic problem. So therefore, you'll have some kashrus agencies which will say that paper plates are not a problem. Other ones say paper plates can't be used for hot food. And the reason is that they have kidneys inside of it, unless they have a kosher Pesach designation. Unfortunately, you'll have, I don't think it's a secret, it's not the mitzvah shemra or anything. I think they say explicitly, though, that they have no problem with it. And if it has kidneys in it, the paper plate, you just, shouldn't use it with hot food, but otherwise they're not concerned about it. So in any case, sometimes you have packing material like that that's being used even for raw meat and chicken. It should be rinsed beforehand. That would be sufficient. And again, but you have it, kidney is batel b'reiv. It's only a small amount of kidneys that's in there in the first place, but we don't really rely on that. I just should mention, this is sort of like trade secrets, but I've been in plants of very, very, quote unquote, are considered to be muhuda de gashkachas, and I see that they're dealing with a lot of oil and selling pastic oil. As in North America, it's not olive oil. Olive oil is a bit different. But I see there's leftover oil there. Then the person that's in charge says, "Well, it's kidneys. It's batel b'reiv." I said, "I don't know. The people that are paying all this amount for your kosher Pesach oil, I wonder if they really are interested in buying something that the kidneys is batel b'reiv." But we don't know for sure. There's kidneys there, and it's certainly batel a million times over. So it's certainly kosher Pesach. Question over here, frozen fish could be a potential problem that definitely needs a kosher Pesach hashkacha. They use glaze. It's called glaze. So sometimes glaze is just water. Officially, it's to protect the fish in the freezing process. It can go anywhere from 4% to 40% of the weight of the fish. So sometimes they just get it to hold water, and you end up paying for ice the price of fish. So it's an economic fraud situation. And it's not a kashrus problem, if not for the fact that many of these end up putting in some sort of kidneys in order to improve the quality of the glaze. So therefore it needs to be kosher Pesach. Eggs, can I buy on Pesach? And is an egg pot needed? The minhag Yisrael is to make a separate egg pot. People ask about the ink, that you can buy eggs without the ink stamp on it. So then, yeah, so do we have to be concerned that the ink is chametz? Probably not. And even if it was chametz, it's explicit din Shulchan Aruch that ink that was made with beer, as long as it was made before chametz, it became inedible before chametz, and there's no problem. You cannot eat it on purpose, but I don't think anybody wants the taste of the ink, and the chances of it being chametz are very remote anyway. So I don't think one would need to avoid eggs if all your eggs have an ink stamp on it. I don't see any problem, even if it was made out of chametz, technically speaking. One's not eating the shells. Does bottled water need to be kosher lePesach? So most of the madrichim, again, when you have a case that people wonder about manufactured foods, do you have to worry about it? So there is such a thing as water being pasteurized. There is such a thing as water being transported from one place to another in a truck, that it's taken from the source in one place and it's bottled in another place. And it's sitting in the truck sometimes for more than 24 hours. And what was the truck used for? Now, how common is this? Not common. Not common at all. And therefore, it does not need to have hashgacha. Is it possible? Yes, it's possible. Salt, what's best to use? So the kosher zaltz, the kosher Pesach zaltz, it has nothing in it other than salt. Anything with additives, there are certain additives they add, especially iodized salt could have certain ingredients that could have Pesach sensitive issues. Sugar. So all the kashrus guides will tell you that sugar is not a problem, except for the OU. If I have time at the end, I'll discuss that, but it looks like I'm not going to have time at the end. You can go on the OU website and read about sugar if you use websites. But other types of sugar, whether it's confectionery sugar or brown sugar, invert sugar, and these sort of things are all problematic, potentially problematic. About boiling the sugar before Pesach. So that goes together with the whole idea of cooking before Pesach. I have a whole list of ingredients, different food items here that I'm not sure I'm going to get to, but I have to answer this question since I mentioned it. So let's take sugar. Let's say that there should be something which was not kosher lePesach in the sugar. How did that happen? It's not likely. But if something did fall in, so then if it was if it was solid, and according to the opinion that even a powder, if you would consider sugar to be granulated sugar to be a solid, which is it's a chumrah on top of a chumrah. So then, if you use the sugar on Pesach, so that bag of sugar, although it was nullified in more than 60, and if it was considered like it be a solid, it would even be batel brave before Pesach. But if you consider like a solid piece, so then it would be chayzer v'nir. It would wake up on Pesach, and you take that sugar in a teaspoon and you put it in your in some water, and then it's chayzer v'nir, and the whole thing is not nullified. However, when you boil it and it dissolves and you turn it into a liquid, so then, except for the Das Rambam that we don't paskin like, so it's not chayzer v'nir. So then it was in batel b'shishim, was nullified in 1/60th, less than 1/60th before Pesach, and then it's not a problem. Let's say it was a little solid piece, so that's why people strain the sugar, excuse me, I said drain. I meant to strain it in case there's anything solid there, so then that would ruin the entire boiling process. So that's why people ask, can I put it? Do I need to boil the sugar if I'm doing it before Pesach? So it's a very difficult question to answer because halachically speaking, you don't need to boil the sugar at all. The sugar is kosher lePesach. We assume it's kosher lePesach. You're being machmer because maybe something happened. So if there's something in there and it's going to dissolve, so then it's the same thing like boiling the sugar. It's gonna dissolve when you boil the sugar, or it's going to dissolve. And whatever other liquid you put it to, just like the sugar dissolved, it'll also dissolve. But if it was a solid, then it's not going to dissolve. Is that going to be chayzer v'nir later on? So if it's something like flour, the Alter Rebbe says it's not concerned about if it's something which is bigger than that or something which is considered to be a solid, then it could, conceivably be a problem. But halachically speaking, it's not a problem. Okay, but to differentiate. When I'm saying it, halachically speaking, it's not a problem. It's not a problem on Pesach either. But we're nevertheless machmer because we want to keep away from mashruch chametz. So, is it another step of chumrah? Yeah, but it's all part of the same chumrah. So I'm not sure exactly. So somebody says, if I don't want to peel my vegetables before Pesach, I want to cook everything before Pesach, and I want to peel my vegetables. Am I allowed? So it's very difficult to answer a question like that because on Pesach, is anything wrong with not peeling your vegetables? Our minhag is we peel everything. But halachically speaking, do you need to peel a carrot? I don't think halachically speaking, the people around it don't peel their potatoes, and they're religious Jews, and I don't think they're eating chametz on Pesach. But nevertheless, we do peel, and there are reasons where one might want to do so before Pesach, but basically, I don't see much of a difference between. But I can't say somebody's doing wrong if they do that. It's really more question for Mashbi, I think, than a Rav. Nuts. So nuts that have any ingredients in it, the BHA, BHT, are carried in a kitnius carrier. So even if they're raw, then if they have that, they can't be used. You have pecans and cashews are singled out by some as having special problems, even if they are raw, because they go through significant processing. Milk, it's proper to buy milk before Pesach. The vitamins are usually in an oil suspension. There are liquid vitamins in the milk. Many of the kashrus agencies just don't put in vitamins for the duration of Pesach. In Canada, the government makes them write on the label that it doesn't have vitamins in it. The old olive oil, schmaltz controversy. So I'm going to show you a PowerPoint, which is not directly on that, but just in general, the whole issue of fraud. Okay, that's a sink insert. If you have a porcelain sink that you can't kasher, that you just clean it well and pour boiling water over it. And enamel, there's a machlekes whether you kasher it on, but you should be using some sort of sink insert inside the sink so the dishes shouldn't be coming directly in contact with the sink itself. Food fraud. So here's from the CFIA. That's the Canadian version of the FDA. And here they're talking about food fraud. Most widely reported in olive oil, honey, dry spices, fish, fruit juices, organic food products. Olive oil is the most falsified item in the entire European Union. Evo, extra virgin olive oil, is something which is very expensive, and the mafia realized they could make more money falsifying the olive oil than selling drugs. Now, does that mean it's not kosher Pesach? So if it is indeed extra virgin olive oil, then it's kosher Pesach without hashgacha. Okay, the question is that what you're getting inside the bottle? So this is, again, I hesitate to call it comical, but you have one kashrus agent is saying that, yeah, we checked up one study and it said that it's really not, it's exaggerated, it's not such a chashash. You don't really need to worry about it. And others are saying, well, look, I mean, they're saying there's all sorts of problems with it. So then they answer, yeah, they're mixing other types of olive oil into the extra virgin olive oil. And the other side says, yeah, but those other types of olive oil need hashgacha. Plus, our studies are showing that often they're putting shemen kitnius. There was once a case where there was 80% canola oil, which is not kosher Pesach. So it goes back and forth. In the meantime, the general principle of the kashrus agencies is extra virgin olive oil does not need to have hashgacha. So I think it's true and it's false. It's true that if it is indeed extra virgin olive oil, it does not need hashgacha. But is that really extra virgin olive oil? So I would recommend if a person is using olive oil only to use one that has hashgacha tamidis. One of the again, Hamish of brands is I'm not sure how reliable that is, but there are a number of hashgachas that are careful to make sure the hashgacha tamidis, if they had a seal on all the relevant equipment and a mashgiach all along the line, then you're sure there's extra virgin olive oil, and that's fine. But the people that use olive oil should not be disparaged, but the people that use schmaltz should also not be disparaged. Mentions over here honey. Honey is also very often mixed with corn syrup, which is obviously not kosher lePesach. Dry spices. I'd like to speak a little bit about this because you have the Rebbe wrote in the Haggadah in Charesis that we would use normally as the whole simon. You can see it there in the Haggadah, but the Rebbe writes, for many years, it's our custom not to use ginger and cinnamon mishum chash taruvas chametz. We're worried about taruvas chametz. So I remember I read this many, many years ago when I was still a bacher. And okay, it sat there until I ended up in having something to do with the kashrus world, and I looked into things and say, "Oh, well, look what's going on over here." So here's an example. So this is from the book, The Science of Food Fraud Forensics. Forensics is a crime laboratory. So here is speaking about food fraud. So here in cinnamon, Sri Lanka is the world's biggest producer of cinnamon. And the powdered version of this aromatic wonder has been adulterated with coffee husk, sago, wheat flour, potato flour, and arrowroot flour because it's cheaper. So they mix it in that you shouldn't notice. It mentions over here somebody named Hassel. We'll mention him in a minute. That's as far as ginger is concerned. And they found this in laboratories today. And so too ginger. So this was from the NIH, National Institute of Health, was a research article over here. And they found over here the addition of wheat flour to powdered ginger. They also found in our days in the laboratory, but there's nothing new under the sun. So this is from a book about food adulteration from 1879. And here he said over here, from the cinnamon, more than a half were adulterated, either baked wheat flour or a sago meal. And here in ginger, the same story, sago meal, tapioca, potato flour, wheat flour, and so on. So spices are almost impossible to avoid adulteration. So here you see, for example, the cinnamon. So it's being harvested 12 months a year. You're not going to have any hashgacha tamidis to keep people from mixing something in. And in addition, it's probably not the people in the field. It's somewhere along the line, and there's so many places where it's being packed and repacked. And especially China is known to be notorious for their fraud. And a lot of the ginger is coming from there, and India is also not far behind. So spices, if people ask about manufacturing products, well, it has a kosher Pesach sign on it, so it shouldn't be a problem. But the fact is that all the kashrus agencies are treating these as what's called as group one ingredients, pure spices, are considered to be kosher Pesach and kosher the whole year without any supervision. And nobody has a hashgacha tamidis on that. They might have hashgacha tamidis mashgiach present in the factory to make sure nothing is being mixed in later on. As far as coffee is concerned, so I don't know. It's already 9:31, so I'm not sure what to do. I mean, here's just from the American Spice Trade Association. Somebody might want to slow this down on the video, so I'll just put through what the association is worried about people mixing things in, and I put in yellow anything which is a kashrus issue. Someone asked about is it more muhuder to buy orange juice than making your own? Because the Rav told them not to make your own orange juice. And the issue with that is what's called scale insects. So you see over here, these spots over here, actually it's a type of wax that's secreted by the insect. And the insect is underneath this wax. There's a whole halachic debate whether they actually have the halachic status of an insect or not. But somebody said to buy Tropicana instead. Well, Tropicana actually was the original ones that they accused of having the problem with the scale insects until they showed that they didn't. And in any case, they often take the outside and they grind it up and actually use it. They extract taste from it, but it's well filtered. So again, if you have oranges that look like this, I would not advise you squeezing them yourself unless you took care of the outside of it. One coffee, just going through my list here. Coffee. So coffee beans as they are, it's assumed that coffee beans, even if they're roasted and even if it's ground, meaning raw, not raw, it's roasted, but it's not instant coffee. Coffee that you have to brew is assumed to be universally assumed to be kosher Pesach, a group one ingredient. Although lately it's been discovered that sometimes they soak in bourbon and different sorts of flavors. I was asked to make sure I go through all the questions, so I'll do that, but let me just finish. I'm almost finished with the list over here. Decaf coffee needs to be kosher l'Pesach. They add ethyl acetate, which is a chametz problem. It could be a chametz gomer. Instant coffee, they often add maltodextrin, which could be chametz, could be kitnius. Spray dried, freeze dried, anytime something is done with machinery could also be an issue. Dried fruit has to be kosher l'Pesach. Often they're using oils to keep things from sticking, and they could be kitnius. Matzah ashira, egg matzah, or anything like that cannot be consumed by Ashkenazim unless, even with the best hechsher, unless the person is sick or has another reason. They have to ask her up for a heter for that. Just to mention about enzymes changing the world of kashrus. So just, almond milk, one would think that would be one of the best things. Almonds are not a problem at all. We're using in the choresis, yeah, but you can have almond milk today that's chametz gomer. They're using enzymes in the production, and the enzymes could be not kosher l'Pesach. So I don't really have time to go through the household items, but I was asked to make sure I cover all the questions that were sent in. So I mentioned number 1, number 2, number 3. Yeah, if my family doesn't use manufactured processed food for Pesach, can I cook with these items before Pesach? Should be no issue. Please explain. I think I did explain that depending what it is that you're worried about, there might be chezer veneer, and even was batal b'shishim before, there's a possibility that it could quote unquote wake up. Same question with peeling, so I answered that too. As far as the cousin, the cooked rice, yeah, juicing the oranges. Okay, for years I purchased. I won't mention the kashrus agency here, but one of the big national agencies, their Pesach guide, and thought everything kosher l'Pesach. When then they read that it only is telling you that it's chametz free, that doesn't mean it's kosher. So I think the world needs to be advised of this, as many are misinformed. The chas v'sholem eating treif when they think they're eating kosher l'Pesach. Someone needs to have achmanas on us. Please address this. Okay, consider it addressed. And I'll just mention, although it's not directly Pesach, but it's related issue, that there people who often ask about what they can have in a Starbucks, and there are different guides put out by different kashrus agencies. So the CRC Chicago, for example, I'm not certain that they still have it on their guide, but I remember the original guide that they gave out had a sentence at the beginning which read as follows: that the Rav, the Av Bezdin of the CRC Chicago, was from Gedalia Schwartz, Oliver Shalom, paskind that if something was used for not chol of Yisrael, then even somebody that uses chol of Yisrael doesn't have to worry about the kelim, doesn't have to worry, so we don't need the kasher kelim. So for those that remember, even those that don't remember, the whole tumult about the milk in about 212 was about kashering the equipment. Everybody was kashering the equipment, but they weren't kashering it properly to 212 to make it boiling, as the Alter Rebbe and the Mishnah Brura and the Rav Paskim Kukulim, everybody requires. And that was the 212 milk back in the late 70s, early 80s, whenever it was, at the beginning of the MEMS, late Lametz. But in the meantime, if you look at that Starbucks manual, so if you read the first sentence, then you realize, oh, everything that's written in this whole guide is not for me, because we do consider non-chol of Yisrael absorbed in a vessel as something that needs to be kashered. So one has to be careful. Any of these guides, one has to be very careful when you're following them to know exactly what they're saying, and many things. You'll see different things from different guides. I went through a little bit today to answer some of the questions over here, and I found it quite interesting. So I was asked if I would go over to address the household items. I will. So I guess everybody was free to hang up anyway. So I will go through the rest of this list here. But before I forget, I just want to put the last slide of my PowerPoint. I was asked to put together some of my shiurim, so I started putting on some Jungalite, started putting together on halachamontreal.com some of the shiurim, so it has some, just started putting up some Pesach information there, so if you want to take a look over there, there are some audio shiurim, some video shiurim, and Bezdas Hashem, there'll be more postings there in the near future. And if anybody wants to learn about the sugar story with the OU, they can just go to the OU site and look and see what the OU says about sugar. Okay, so I was asked to go through some household items. Okay, parchment paper, the guides are writing that they do need to be kosher Pesach. There are issues with them. One of the common issues, which applies both to paper and plastic, less to plastic than it does to paper, but many types of plastic also, is that starch is often used to keep things from sticking together. So let's say you have plastic gloves. So plastic gloves you can have with starch and without starch. Now, if it's with starch, then you have to see what type of starch it is. Now, it's very unlikely to be wheat starch. Um, Commercially, that's not something which is customarily used. It could be cornstarch, and it could be talc, which is kosher Pesach. So, is there anything wrong with using gloves with cornstarch? So, lechatchila, one shouldn't. If one ends up having to use something which was used with cornstarch, you just have to make sure you wash your hands before you touch the food. It's not also bahana. There's no prohibition of getting benefit from it, so one could use it. When you have, sometimes they have paper plates to keep them from sticking together. They'll put some sort of starch. If you've ever had a disposable plastic tablecloth, and some of them say, "Oh, this is a great brand." You just open it up, and it opens up right away. And the other one, you're pulling apart and trying to find an end, and you can barely open it up, or a garbage bag or something like this. And why does one open up so easily and one doesn't? Usually it's the presence of starch. Now, what's the nature of that starch? So, um, it could be chametz, it could be not. Um, but commercially speaking, it's not likely to be chametz at all. That kitnius is the most you have to worry about. Um, Fine. So Ziploc bags, regular plastic, which does not have any starch added to it, should not need hashgacha. But again, I'm not going to sign off forever on Ziploc bags, and I've never been in the Ziploc bag factory to know that they don't use any starch. But I would check some of the guides and plastic. The plastic itself is not a problem. Um, to the best, I've never heard of disposable plastic bowls and plates and cutlery having any starch on it. So I don't see why that should need hashgacha. But again, could things change in the future? Everything could change. There are those that say when it comes to disposable aluminum pans, they should be washed with soap and water. What happens if you don't use soap on Pesach? So then it switches the bigger chumrah. There are those that say that there's some remnant of oil on some of them. Generally, that's not the case, but sometimes it does happen. Styrofoam plates and bowls. So a number of years ago, there was a well-known figure in the kashrus world that made a whole tumult about it. But his analysis was not accepted by the rest of the kashrus world. So it's generally accepted that styrofoam plates and bowls are fine. Paper, again, I would recommend getting a kosher Pesach, one with a good hashgacha because of the possibility of starch. And the same thing when it comes to napkins and paper towels and these sort of things. Many of them do contain starch, either sometimes to keep them from sticking together, but more often in the formulation itself. Is that a problem? Is it going to come out? So if it's used on hot foods, then the taste of it's going to come out. And if the taste of it does come out, the worst it's going to be is kitnius. Kitnius, as we said, is nullified if it's less than half. So b'diavad is not going to be a problem. So if a person uses napkins and paper towels without a kosher pesach hechsher, we don't put this person to chayrim, we don't look down on them. But to say that there's no hiddur at all in it, I wouldn't say that either. There are many of the kashrus agencies that write you should take out the outer three layers because there's glue used in the rolls of paper towels to hold them together. Um, we have a lot of chumras. If the chumras are driving you up the wall, I think this is one that you can be a little bit mamekel. The chances today of that glue being chametzik are very minute, and that you have to go through three layers because maybe some of the glue leaked through because a bit of a guzma. A dishwashing soap and hand soap, it's okay. This is something I was I'll address here. It has to it overflows from the kitchen into the rest of the house. But there's a central issue regarding many products it mentions over here: hand sanitizers, dishwashing soap, and hand soap. There's two general issues which are discussed. One I touched on before when I spoke about the ink, that it says in Shulchan Aruch that in the old days, they used to make ink out of beer. So they would take the beer and then they would put the coloring into it later. And since it was made inedible before Pesach came in, if the ink was made on Pesach, it's prohibited to use. But if it was made before Pesach, you're allowed to use it. You're not allowed to eat it. Now, who would want to drink ink? I'm not exactly sure. The whole discussion that they used to put the tip of the quill in their mouth to get the ink running. Do we have to worry about that? The person doesn't have in mind the problem of eating something which is inedible is achshave, that you're considering it food, but here you're not considering it food. The person is not snacking on their quill and their ink. So we don't have to worry about achshave. In any case, the principle is that once something became nifsal mechilas kelev, unusable, not even a dog would eat it, so then it's permitted to be used on Pesach. So all of these different products, I'm not speaking about products was not the subject for tonight, but the same concept applies over here, that alcohol, if you have chametzdika alcohol and it was mixed with something which made it inedible, so then why shouldn't that be in the same category as the ink? So if you have perfume or deodorant, spray deodorant is normally liquid. They do have those with a powder. But that's why the halach will distinguish between a solid and a liquid. And why is that? Because the Moshe Feinstein wrote, it's famous, it's used in the industrial world today. You take the alcohol is normally put through a chemical process that it's made inedible. And then later on, when it's brought to they don't want people using it for more profitable products like vodka and scotch. So if the person's using alcohol to make vinegar or hand cleanser or something, so they want not to be usable for food. So they put in something which makes it inedible, and then they put another chemical which makes it edible again at the end of the process. So therefore, we see that something was made inedible today might just be a temporary state. So we have similar things in halacha, something which was one point not edible, later on became edible. You do have to worry about it. In any case, that's something which is common by liquids in general. When it comes to solids, all of these things, all these different products, when it comes to solid, we're not worried about it. So when it comes hand soap, you're not using it on dishes. I don't see any reason to be machmer with hand soap. You're doing with dishwashing soaps, and then Yisrael Kadeshim Haim, and many of these things that we're speaking about is a special Kedusha of Am Yisrael, and hand sanitizers are in general not a problem. And I noticed this year for the first time, so you'll see on these product lists, you'll see there was a shift this year, I think even compared to last year, a lot of products that they would give whole lists of some of the kashrus agencies, lists of perfumes and deodorants and things of this nature. And now they're saying that there's no problem. You can use any of them that you want if you live in the United States. And the reason for that is that the research is showing that the ethyl alcohol that is being used is almost always not chametz, very rarely chametzdik, although you can make alcohol out of virtually anything. But what's being produced for commercial use in the United States is almost always kitnius of one form or another. There's the list a very, very small amount, so they're not concerned. It's a small amount. In any case, the Berel and hand sanitizers are not a problem. One other thing I've written down over here is about oven mitts, which I thought was a good ha'ara. Things like pot holders, things of this sort, you end up with mamushas of food on them, and that could frequently be an issue. And I think I've gone through all the questions. So I think that's it. Thank you very much for listening. And Shabbat Kosher Freilich Pesach, and should be the Simchas HaGeula. And certainly all of our preparations in the Hiddur Mitzvah, that all it says to come closer to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And certainly Hashem sees even the Ratzon that we should come close to Him, will that bring out our tshuka to be close to him, and his tshuka, his desire to be close to us, and certainly be merit immediately the Gula Mitzvah Vashlema, and be able to participate with the Korban Pesach together with Mashiach Tzidkenu and the Beis HaMikdash, and have the Yitzias Mitzrayim from all of our limitations and all of our the self-imposed limitations and the limitations of our environment and the limitations of Golus with the Gula Mitzvah Vashlema. Call to.